In 1979, an American president signed a secret paper from a small room inside the White House. That paper wasn't a declaration of war, it wasn't even public. But it's the one that set in motion more than 4 decades of war in one of the most fought over countries on Earth, and helped create America's biggest enemy by America's own hand. This isn't a conspiracy theory, these are declassified files. And a direct admission from the U.S. National Security Advisor himself, in his own words, on the record. You'll hear exactly what he said in a moment. For now, remember just one word he used to describe it: trap. It was called Operation Cyclone. And to this day, most people have never heard of it. But everything that came after, from 9/11 to the Taliban, to the Afghanistan we know today, started with one decision, in one room, in 1979. And to understand how it happened, we have to go back 1 year earlier, to a year when no one expected the Soviet Union to make the most catastrophic miscalculation of its history. December 1979. Soviet tanks crossed the Afghan border. On paper, this is an operation to protect a collapsing communist ally. That's the story Moscow told the world. But in Washington, the reaction wasn't alarm. It was anticipation. Because months before the invasion, Washington had already begun quietly arming the government's opponents. Off the books. No public vote, no headline. And here's the question most textbooks skip entirely. Was America just reacting to the invasion? Or did America, indirectly, help push Moscow into it in the first place? Because what happened in the days after the invasion wasn't a normal defensive response. It was a plan long since drafted. A plan that had simply been waiting for its excuse. And behind it, one name. The National Security Advisor who, years later, would claim in an interview that the whole operation had been planned from the start. The question is, how much of that was true the day it happened, and how much was rewritten by memory afterward? His name was Zbigniew Brzezinski, National Security Advisor to President Jimmy Carter, and he's the man whose memo would echo for decades. On July 3rd, 1979, 6 full months before the Soviet invasion, Carter signed a secret order to begin aiding the opponents of Afghanistan's communist government. By Brzezinski's own later account, he told the president that very day that this support could push Moscow toward military intervention, and that the United States should welcome it. Years later, in a 1998 interview, he was asked if he regretted any of it. He didn't hesitate. Regret what? That secret operation was an excellent idea. It drew the Russians into the Afghan trap. Now, most historians agree the Soviets had their own reasons to invade: a client government on the verge of collapse, and a fear of Islamist unrest spreading into Moscow's own Muslim republics. Whether Washington truly baited that decision, or simply moved fast once it happened, is still argued over today. What isn't argued over is what came next. Because a trap on this scale, real or claimed, doesn't run on a memo and a signature alone. It needs an entire network: funding, weapons, coordination with other countries. And that's where the name that stayed secret for decades comes in. Operation Cyclone. Operation Cyclone became the largest covert funding operation in CIA history. The number started in the low millions in 1979 and climbed past $600 million a year by the late 1980s. But America couldn't get involved directly. This was the height of the Cold War, and any exposed American involvement risked a direct confrontation with Moscow, so they needed a middleman. That middleman was Pakistan's intelligence agents, the ISI. America funneled money and weapons to Pakistan, and Pakistan distributed it to the Afghan fighting factions. This is how America funded an entire war, without its official hand, by the idea of jihad against an occupying godless power. This group later became known as the Afghan Arabs, and the difference here matters a great deal. The local Afghan fighter was defending his home. The foreign volunteer was part of a broader, semi-independent network, separate from the ISI and CIA chain of command. One of its organizers was a Palestinian named Abdullah Azzam, who laid the ideological foundation for the idea of a transnational jihad. Among the volunteers who joined Azzam's network, a young, wealthy Saudi named Osama bin Laden. At this stage, bin Laden was no more than one financier among many. The CIA wasn't funding him directly. The real story is more layered than that. What truly changed everything wasn't a person. It was a single weapon, introduced in 1986, that flipped the entire war upside down. For 9 years, the Soviets controlled the skies completely. The Mi-24 gunship, nicknamed the Flying Death Wagon among the fighters, could hit any convoy, any village with no real response possible. The ground weapons the Mujahideen simply couldn't reach it. September 1986. America made a decision it had hesitated over for years, handing over advanced American Stinger missiles directly to the Mujahideen. The first 3 Stingers fired shot down 3 Soviet helicopters in seconds near Jalalabad airfield. From that moment, everything changed. The sky that once fully belonged to the Soviets became a trap of its own. Pilots were forced to fly higher, further, slower to respond. Over the next 3 years, more than 260 Soviet aircraft and helicopters went down the same way. And here historians disagree. Did the Stinger decide the outcome of the war? Or was Gorbachev already planning to withdraw for separate economic and political reasons in Moscow? The truth is, probably both. But what's beyond doubt is that the morale of the Soviet army broke at that moment. For the first time, there was a clear sense that this war had no winning end in sight. And just 2 years after the first Stinger, an army once considered among the strongest in the world began packing its bags. But here's what almost no one in Washington was asking in 1989. Did America actually win this war? Or was this just the beginning of a much bigger problem? February 1989. The last Soviet soldier crosses the Friendship Bridge out of Afghanistan. 9 years of occupation. Over. In Washington, they celebrated a victory. America had defeated the other superpower without sending a single American soldier to fight. But the story usually told is missing an important part. Files that surfaced later show that Gorbachev had actually decided to withdraw as early as 1985, a full year before the Stinger missiles even arrived. The real reason wasn't just battlefield losses. It was an exhausted Soviet economy and a new Moscow leadership that saw Afghanistan as a financial and political bleeding wound, not just a military one, meaning the victory America celebrated was far messier than "we armed the Mujahideen, so we defeated the Soviets." It was an intersection between a successful war of attrition and an internal Soviet collapse that was already underway. But that's not the question that matters right now. The real question is, America won the war against the Soviets. But what happened to all the weapons, the entire network, and all the fighters trained and armed over 10 years? Because what happened right after wasn't a celebration. It wasn't reconstruction. It wasn't even follow-up. America, which had spent more than $2 billion on this war, withdrew its attention almost entirely. Almost overnight. After the Soviet withdrawal, America didn't cut off funding immediately. It continued for a few more years, at a reduced level. But what genuinely stopped was any real interest in Afghanistan's own future. There was no reconstruction plan, no support for building institutions, or a government capable of holding the country together. The one goal had been achieved: defeat the Soviets. And once that happened, Afghanistan was no longer a priority. In 1990, America imposed sanctions on Pakistan, its partner that had managed the entire arming operation for 10 straight years. The reason wasn't Afghanistan at all. It was Pakistan's nuclear program. But the result was the same. The last official thread connecting Washington to the region was cut. Into the vacuum America left behind, other forces moved in. Pakistan kept backing specific factions for its own interests. And the Mujahideen themselves, once united by a common enemy, began fighting each other for power. And all the weapons, all the training, all the network America had carefully built over 10 years stayed exactly where it was, unsupervised, uncontrolled, with no single unifying goal left to hold it together. Within just 6 years out of that chaos, an entirely new movement emerged. And just over a decade after the Soviets left, that same network America had armed struck America at the heart of its own soil. In 1988, in the Pakistani city of Peshawar, the leaders of the Arab Legion that had fought in Afghanistan held a meeting. The decision made in that meeting was to establish a new organization to carry on jihad even after the war against the Soviets ended. They called it Al-Qaeda, meaning the network that would later threaten America didn't just emerge from the post-war vacuum. It was born inside the war itself, while American funding and weapons were still flowing. But after the Soviet withdrawal and after Afghanistan fell into civil war, Al-Qaeda found room to grow quietly, far from any real oversight. Out of the chaos, another movement rose too. The Taliban, backed by Pakistan, which controlled most of the country by 1996. Osama bin Laden, once just a young financier among many in the early war, returned to Afghanistan that same year and built a close relationship with Taliban leadership. The network that had been built with shared Western and Arab funding, weapons, and training now had a fully secure safe haven. And just 5 years later, that same network attacked America directly. September 11th, 2001. And here's the bitter irony. 20 years after Operation Cyclone began, America went back into Afghanistan to fight a network it had never built directly, but it helped make possible $1 and one rifle at a time. And this is the question Washington has never fully answered. Could anyone have seen this coming? Or was it simply the price of bringing down an empire? One signature in 1979. A world changed forever. One attack in 2001. The thread never broke. The price wasn't paid by the men who designed it. It was paid by everyone else. Today, the same logic is running again. Same promise, same outcome. The question worth sitting with: does history repeat itself? Or do we just keep letting it?